Welcome. In this video, we'll be taking a look at how to factor expressions that are only two terms. So the method that we're actually going to use looks a little funny at first because it says three terms. Well, that looks a little funny because I just said we were going to factor something with two terms. Well, it turns out that if I have an expression of two terms, that I can actually write that as three terms. So the ones that we've done so far have kind of looked like this. So we've factored expressions that have three distinct terms, and the method that we've used to do that is the key number method. So if you haven't seen that yet, go back and watch the videos on how to do those first, because we'll be using that knowledge in this video. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a look at what I've got as an expression, and notice how in the ones that we've done so far have gone from a squared term to then just a single factor of that variable, and then to just a number by itself. So we've gone from x squared to x's to just a number by itself. Well, looking at this guy, we're missing something. We've got the v squared and we've got the number all by itself, but what we're missing is the middle term with just the v's. Well, if we're missing it, that means that there must not be any of them. So the way I can rewrite this expression is like this: v squared, and then we've got really no v's at all. That means we have 0 v's minus 25. And now all I'm going to do is factor what I've got using the key number method. So the key number method, again, if you haven't seen the videos, go back and watch a few of those first before you attempt this. But the key number method, I'm going to multiply my two outside guys together. So 1 times negative 25 is negative 25. And then I drag down this middle term, which is 0. So I have to think of two numbers that multiply together to be negative 25, but at the same time they have to add together to be 0. Well, if numbers are going to multiply together to be negative 25, then one of them is going to have to be positive and one of them is going to have to be negative. So I think in this case, negative 5 and positive 5 are going to do the trick. If I multiply them together, I get negative 25. If I add them together, I get 0. So then, once I know my key number, the next step is to basically break up the middle term. So I've got 1v squared plus 0v minus 25. And then, again, I can break up 0v into negative 5v plus 5v. So then I've got 1v squared minus 5v plus 5v minus 25. So notice I haven't changed anything because negative 5v plus 5v is still 0. So then the next step is I take what I've got and I factor by grouping. So in the first group, it looks like my greatest common factor is just a single v. So I'd have v times, well, if I factor a v out of the first term, that leaves v left over. If I factor a v out of the second term, that leaves 5. And then I've got plus. If I factor a 5 out of both of these terms, that's going to leave me with, well, v. And then if I factor a 5 out of the second guy, it leaves me with minus 5. And now the last step of the process is to look at what I've got, which I see that both terms have this v minus 5 group in common. So that makes up my first factor, v minus 5. And my second factor is the leftovers, which is v and then plus 5. So again, if you're looking at this like, well, what did you just do? I've never seen this before. Go back and watch the videos on factoring trinomials before you actually go any further. Okay. I want you to try number 3. Pause the video and then restart it after you've given it a try. So again, for number 3, our first step is to turn this into a 3-term expression. So we're missing the w's. That must mean we don't have any. So when I multiply my two outside guys together, that gives me negative 64. If I drag down my middle term, that gives me 0. Now I'm thinking of two numbers that multiply together to be negative 64, and at the same time they have to add together to give me 0. So I think negative 8 and positive 8 are going to do the trick here. So then, if I take my original expression, I've just figured out how to break up the middle term. So instead of 0w, I'm going to use my key number. So I've got negative 8w plus 8w. And everything else is going to stay the same. And now I'm going to factor by grouping. So I've got my first two terms in one group, my second two terms in a second group. And these first two terms I can definitely factor a w out, which is going to leave w minus 8. The second group I can factor an 8 out, which is going to leave w minus 8. So my final answer is going to be w minus 8 times w plus 8. Okay, I want you to try number 1, pause the video, and then restart after you've given it a try. So number 1, our first step is actually to make sure we have the terms in the right order. So notice that it's 4 minus 81x squared. My first move would actually be to write the x squared terms first, then the x's, which I don't have any, and then the 4. So now if I use my key number method, multiply these two outside guys together, I get negative 324. And then if I drag down this middle guy, I get 0. So I have to think of two numbers that multiply together to give me negative 324. And I think what you'd find is negative 18 and positive 18 would do the trick. So what we're left with then is negative 81x squared plus 0x plus 4. And I just found out how to break up the middle term. I'm going to break it up into negative 18x plus 18x. And then I've got negative 81x squared. Okay, so notice how the first term is negative. So when I do my grouping, and I'm factoring my first group, I'm actually going to factor out a negative. And the greatest common factor is going to be negative 9x here. So if I factor a negative 9x out, I'm left with 9x and then plus 2. Again, it's plus 2 because negative 9x times positive 2 is negative 18x. And the second group I can factor 2 out, and that leaves me with 9x plus 2. And now notice I've got 9x plus 2 group in common. So that's going to make up my first factor, and my second factor is negative 9x plus 2.